is also a sign of desperation that Putin has to resort to North Korean troops because he's not able to raise the kind of combat power that he needs to sustain his invasion with Russian troops.
Now, more than 600,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured since the invasion of Ukraine. That's according to the new Secretary General of NATO. The figure appears to confirm numbers given by the Pentagon last month, though the Kremlin says it won't give such data as it is a state secret. Speaking to journalists in Brussels, Mark Rutte also confirmed that North Korean troops have been sent to help Russia and said some have already been deployed in the Kursk border region, which is where Ukraine has occupied a chunk of Russian territory.
The deployment of North Korean troops represents one, a significant escalation in the DPRK's ongoing involvement in Russia's illegal war. Two, yet another breach of UN Security Council resolutions. And three, a dangerous expansion of Russia's war.
Well, Jeffrey Pryce is a former special counsel to the US Department of Defense and joins us now. Good evening to you, Jeffrey.
Good evening, Carol. Thank you for having me.
Good to speak to you. Let me start with that rather stark figure of more than 600,000 Russian soldiers killed or injured, not confirmed, of course, by the Kremlin, but it does appear to tally with figures from the Pentagon. What do you make of that figure?
It sounds right, and it's just an example of the horrendous cost that Russia's invasion has had. I don't think this is what Putin planned on, but he definitely does not seem to be backing down. That's why you see, I mean, in different stages, recruiting prisoners, they're now having to provide greater and greater incentives, financial, for Russians to join, and now it looks like they're contemplating putting North Koreans perhaps even into the fight. So, I mean, it does seem like a sign of desperation. Russia has paid a tremendous price for this invasion, and sadly, I don't think Putin shows any signs of wanting to stop.
And we'll talk in a moment a bit more about the deployment of North Korean soldiers, but clearly Russia's not confirming that figure. We also don't get figures, do we, from the Ukrainian side? I mean, do we have any idea of whether similar numbers of Ukrainians have been lost in this war?
Their losses have been very heavy. There's no question about that. And they are not confirming numbers there. You can understand why. But the losses have been tremendous on both sides. And in Ukraine, it's also been civilians who have paid an enormous price, not just as far as civilians hurt in the bombing of a hospital, the bombing of civilian buildings and the like, but also there's this concerted effort that the Russians have been at for some time to take out the energy infrastructure, to make life miserable for Ukrainians, and in particular, as winter approaches, to deny them the energy and the heat that they need. And this affects, people throughout Ukraine. And there's no civilian Russians in Ukraine, but there's a lot of civilian Ukrainians in Ukraine, and they're paying a price too.
I mean, it's unclear where NATO has come up with this figure of 600,000 Russians casualties in this war. Do you think it's reasonable to think that there could be similar numbers of Ukrainian troops as well as you've mentioned, civilians that have died?
Well, I don't think it's in the same ballpark because, to put it bluntly, Russia does not take the same care for its troops that the Ukrainians take for theirs. They mount human wave assaults. They put people in the front lines of assaults whose lives they really don't seem to have that much regard for, putting them into the meat grinder and then putting more well-trained, more high-value troops behind them. So Russia, unfortunately, is willing to sustain incredibly high losses because of sort of the Russian way of war. And the Ukrainians, I think, to their credit, are not quite so ready to sacrifice the lives of their troops. We've seen this in Bakhmut, in other areas in the Donbass. So I would not expect that Ukrainians would be quite so ready to use their men as, to put it bluntly, cannon fodder, as Putin seems to be willing to do.
And meanwhile, we've also had this confirmation of North Korean troops being deployed to help Russia, including being deployed in that Kursk region, which is where Ukraine has seized a chunk of Russian territory. We heard Mark Rutte there describing this as a significant escalation. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. You're talking about a country which has no role in this conflict entering into combat if that's what they do. And they will become legitimate targets for the Ukrainians if they do enter the combat. But North Korea is on the other side of the planet, is under UN resolutions that ban this kind of activity. So it is an enormous it is an escalation. And I think it is also a sign of desperation that Putin has to resort to North Korean troops because he's not able to raise the kind of combat power that he needs to sustain his invasion with Russian troops.
How significant do you think, in terms of military strength, could be this involvement of North Korean troops? You describe it, of course, as another indication of certainly of the figures of the numbers of Russians that have been lost already in the war, the need to try to bolster the armed forces. But are they likely to make a significant difference on the ground, do you think?
I mean, we will see. There's a lot that remains to be seen. These do not look like the kind of troops that Russia has been raising in the prisons and the like. From some reports I've seen, these are significantly professional troops that North Korea is sending. And if it's this kind of deal with the devil, that may be the kind of troops that North Korea would send. So they might be higher quality than some of the Russian troops. We will see. That there's a lot that remains to be seen. And politically, this would be a whole new ballgame, and it might change a lot of things, including on the Ukrainian side, if they bring in North Korea into a conflict which North Korea has no legitimate place in. And I should mention, this is not the only sort of rogue state that's become involved. Iran, not with troops, but with drones and other kinds of weapons, is also playing a major role in supplying the Russian effort. And so North Korea has already been significantly involved in providing Russia with weapons. This looks like yet another escalation of their involvement.
Jeffrey Pryce, former special counsel to the US Department of Defense. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol.
Now, do stay with us here on Times Radio.
Today, I can confirm that North Korean troops have been sent to Russia and that North Korean military units have been deployed to the Kursk region. The deployment of North Korean troops represents, one, a significant escalation in the DPRK's ongoing involvement in Russia's illegal war. Two, yet another breach of UN Security Council resolutions. And three, a dangerous expansion of Russia's war. NATO calls on Russia and the DPRK to cease these actions immediately. The deepening military cooperation between Russia and North Korea is a threat to both the Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic security. It undermines peace on the Korean Peninsula and fuels the Russian war against Ukraine. But the deployment of North Korean troops to Kursk is also a sign of Putin's growing desperation. Over 600,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded in Putin's war, and he is unable to sustain his assault on Ukraine without foreign support.